And at 9 years old, right before that summer trip where I took my first drink of alcohol, I accepted Jesus and I was baptized in their church. But by the time I turned 15, I was taking pills, I was smoking weed, I was drinking alcohol, I was hiding alcohol in my room. I was drinking heavily by the time before I even got my driver's license, I was drinking pretty heavily. At that time, I was what the Bible refers to as a double-minded man, praising God on Wednesday nights and getting drunk and high on the weekends. She was ready to take her own life. She was in the bathroom with the door locked, and she was ready to break the bathroom mirror to slit her wrist. And then I was introduced to crystal meth, which became my drug of choice. I saw fingers coming through the door and they pulled the door down. It was about 20 cops in riot gear, dope sniffing dogs. There were gang members, guns, and chaos going on in our house. My plan was to get clean and sober, get our daughter back, and then get high again. And that God was not just knocking on the door of my heart, he was banging on the door of my heart.
2 Corinthians 5:17 says, if anyone is in Christ, they are a new creation. The old is gone, the new is here. So, do you consider yourself a Christian? Have you ever asked Jesus into your life? Did your life change permanently, or did you at some point go back to your old way of living? What happened to the new creation? What happened to the old is gone? Why is it so hard to make a permanent change in my life? Why do I seem to be stuck in a vicious cycle of insanity? There is a principle that says, consciously choose to commit all my life and will to Christ's care and control. Maybe permanent change takes both. Maybe I need to surrender my will every single day. Is it possible to make lasting change, or am I doomed to repeat my history over and over again? Am I alone in my quest for change, or are there others who can help? These are topics that I want to discuss with our guest today as he shares his life change story with us. I'm Eric Hutchinson, and this is the If Nothing Changes podcast. Today, our guest is zooming in all the way from Utah, and I can't wait for you to hear his incredible story. So, hey, new friend, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hey, Eric. My name is Travis Cox. I am a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. I celebrate recovery from drugs and alcohol, and I am currently working on anger and sarcasm issues.
Well, hey, Travis, welcome to our podcast. I'm really excited to hear your story, and I know the listeners are too. So I'm going to let you start off with kind of where you grew up. Tell us a little bit about where you were born and raised.
Well, I was born and raised in Southern California. And my parents divorced when I was 2 years old, so I was raised by a single mom. And we lived in the Southern California area, bounced around a lot. I went to 5 different elementary schools because we moved a lot in the early stages of after their divorce. So that was a struggle, making new friends and a new school every time I turned around. And finally that settled down about junior high and remained at the same school all through junior high and high school.
So you were 2 years old whenever your dad left or they got divorced. So did your mom date? Did she have other friends around, or was it just you and your mom?
Yeah, she dated. It was the 70s. So she was out having a good time. She was not saved at the time. And so I spent a lot of Friday and Saturday nights at Grandma and Grandpa's house while she was out doing her thing, meeting guys, dancing, that kind of thing. And so I had a lot of time with my grandparents growing up as my only sitters that watched me when I was young, growing up.
Did you have any siblings then, or were you the only child?
So I'm an only child. My dad did remarry. He married a lady who already had 4 kids whose husband had passed away. And at about 5 years old, I started flying up to Sacramento every summer to stay a month out of the summer with my dad and his new family. And so I had a stepbrother and three stepsisters. My stepbrother was 2 years older than me, so him and I were we hung around and palled around a lot. And I looked forward to having my siblings around me. It was something I didn't have back home in Southern California.
So you got to see them in the summertime, and so it sounds like your dad was a little bit a part of your life as you got into elementary school and got into that time period. So do you notice, we talk about in recovery dysfunction, and do you look back on those younger years pre-high school and see any dysfunction? You were living there with your mom, and then you went and spent the summers with your dad. Did you see any dysfunction going on, or that you recognize now that you didn't recognize then?
Yeah, 100%. I grew up without a dad in the house, and my dad was only 400 miles away, but he was not very involved in my life. He sent his child support, he sent his Christmas presents, his birthday presents, and I got a phone call usually when I was doing something wrong, and needed a little bit of fatherly nudge to get me back on track. But when I would go up and stay there, I spent most of my time with my siblings because he was working all the time, and I'd get a few days with him. But that played a lot into a lot of things down the line that added a lot of trauma to my life. And growing up 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 years old, I was a very, very angry young kid, very angry young man for not having a dad there. All my friends that I lived near in my neighborhood all had their parents there. And so I had a lot of jealousy of them, and I hung out with them and did things with their dads too. But it was, it was one of the main components of learning the wrong coping mechanisms as I was growing up, was not having a dad there. And my two main coping mechanisms were shutting down or lashing out in anger.
Wow. So anger, were you blaming someone else, or did you internalize it and blame yourself? Or how was what did you believe about yourself?
I blamed everybody else. There were times where I questioned, is it my fault? Is it my fault? But I didn't dwell on that too much. For me, it was easier to blame my mom, my dad, everybody else, not realizing as I got older and after really having adult conversations with them both that, that's just the way things played out. And sometimes people are just the wrong mix. And he had a wonderful marriage to his second wife, my stepmom, and they raised those 4 kids. And so I saw a dad and I'll share this. This is flashing way forward. Talking to my stepbrother a few years ago, I said, I'll never know what it was like, what I would have turned out like if I would have had a dad growing up. And he says, look at me. Your dad was the only dad I ever knew. And so he became his dad at about 5 or 6 years old. And that was the only dad he ever knew. He says, I turned out the way I am today because I had your dad in my life. So that gave me a lot of comfort, a lot of reassurance. It was a hard lead up to that conversation of just a lot of resentment, a lot of anger, a lot of bitterness. The majority of the reasons that I ever got into bad things and drugs and alcohol and all that were because of the anger and the bitterness and the abandonment and all the reasons that I used as a motivator to self-medicate.
So did you get into a lot of fights at school? Did you get in trouble at school? Now this is, again, I'm talking a little bit pre-high school. I know we get in high school, we get a little more freedom and stuff. Did you, a lot of times the anger pushes us to abuse other people or get angry at other people and stuff too. Was that a part of your life, or did you have some close friends at school? I mean, tell me a little bit about that.
Hurt people hurt people. And it's a common phrase. It sounds a little cliche, but it's the absolute truth. Hurt people hurt other people. And we don't hurt other people necessarily to make ourselves feel better, but we want to deflect what we're feeling. And so there were certain kids in the neighborhood that I bullied. Not all of them, just the ones that were defenseless. And in elementary school, I ended up in the principal's office a handful of times. And back in the 70s, the principal's office was not the place you wanted to be because there was a lot of they still believed in capital punishment in the school. So or excuse me, corporal punishment, not capital punishment. And so, yeah, I ended up, I had a lot of phone calls with my mom, and my mom having to get off work early and come pick up her son. And that carried over through junior high and high school too. I got in a lot of, as I got older, those altercations turned into fights. And I had quite a few run-ins with almost being suspended from school for my actions.
Did you witness any substance abuse at home, like from your mom, or even the summer from your dad and his new wife and kids, or anything like that, or was that strictly outside the house?
Well, again, it was the 70s growing up, 70s and 80s. Everybody was kind of free spirit and partying and doing their thing. Um, I didn't notice drug use in our house with my mom, although I found out a little later there was a lot of marijuana, a lot of pills, but she drank up until she got saved, up until her come to Jesus moment. She drank a lot of wine. She went out and partied a lot. And I noticed it up at my dad's too, that it was social drinking at my dad's. There weren't sloppy drunks falling around and stuff, but there was alcohol always in both houses. And I mean, I can still see that giant gallon bottle of wine sitting in the refrigerator at home. So yeah, there were times where my mom would come home after working sometimes two jobs because she was raising a single child and trying to make ends meet. And she would be relaxing in the bath, and she'd ask me to bring her a glass of wine while she was in the bath. And that was normal routine. You know, she had a big problem with alcohol and with Valium, with pills. And until she got saved and had her moment, which is her story is another one that's pretty amazing. Um, I had taken my first drink of alcohol at 9 years old. It was on one of those summer trips to my dad's. He asked me to get him a beer out of the fridge, and I asked him if I could open it and try a sip. And I didn't start drinking at 9 years old. I tried alcohol for the first time. But it wasn't long after that I learned that I could use that to mask how I was feeling.
So let's get into that a little bit. So you said you're a 9. So as you get into junior high, high school, you start moving into that. And of course, with age comes a little bit more freedom. And it sounds to me like your mother, being a single mom, was working. Maybe she was out of the house some. So you start having a little bit more freedom. Did you start using that freedom to get into some things maybe that you shouldn't?
Absolutely. Yeah. I was a latchkey kid growing up. I was the typical kid with the house key on a piece of yarn tied around my neck uh, through elementary school. I would come home oftentimes to an empty house and have to cook dinner and wait for her to get home. And I knew that. That's what I knew. And so there was a lot of free time on my hands. I started hanging around kids that were also making wrong choices. And about 12 years old, so right getting into probably the summer of sixth grade to seventh grade, I think I tried marijuana for the first time. Um, and unlike alcohol, because alcohol, I didn't enjoy that taste when I tried it the first time. The marijuana, I think I enjoyed. And so that became not a regular thing, but an occasional thing. But by the time I turned 15, I was taking pills, I was smoking weed, I was drinking alcohol, I was hiding alcohol in my room. I was drinking heavily by the time before I even got my driver's license, I was drinking pretty heavily.
So what kind of pills are you getting as a teenager?
I think the first time I was offered pills, it was probably uh, speed, probably like a Black Beauty or something like that. Back then, the big pills were Black Beauties, were Reds. I think at 15, I tried my first Quaalude. That was kind of an instant love affair there. That got me to a place where I felt nothing and didn't worry about anything. And combine that with alcohol, it was just yeah. So as a result of all that, you can probably imagine my school was spiraling downwards as my partying lifestyle was going on an upward swing. So there was a lot of grade problems. But at the time, my mom knew nothing about what I was doing. She didn't know there was any drugs or anything like that going on. And it wasn't nothing major until I graduated high school.
I was going to ask you if you would classify yourself as an addict in high school, because a lot of times it's just experimental, or, hey,
Right.
that we were at a party, everybody else was drinking, so I was drinking, and so I did this, but it wasn't one of those that it was, it was an addiction and that it was clearly standing out. So it sounds to me like it wasn't really an addiction in high school. Is that accurate?
Not up until I turned about 16 and got my driver's license. And then the main thing was alcohol. Looking back, I saw that I was an alcoholic at 16. I don't think I was a hardcore drug addict at 16. There were lots of parties. Everybody was partying back then. So whatever was there was done. So there was a lot of partying going on, but I wasn't taking pills and smoking weed on a daily basis, but I was drinking on a daily basis. I was drinking before I'd go to school. I'd show up to school with a buzz, and as soon as I got home, I'd get another buzz. And so it was a thing. I had 2 incidences under the age of 18 where I had blackout driving. And I look back now at only God's hand kept me from killing not only myself, but somebody else.
So what would you say if you could nail it down to your biggest struggle in your adolescent time period there? So we'll say, junior high, high school, whatever, growing up there, what would you say, this was my biggest struggle? This is what I struggled the most with. It caused me the most pain, or that, that I dealt with the most. What would you say was your biggest struggle?
I think my biggest struggle was my attitude. I had a really bad attitude that stemmed from growing up without a father in the house. I look back at having such major father issues, and I blamed him a lot. And, then realizing later as I worked through the process of recovery that, I was casting so much blame towards him when it was unfair to him to blame him for everything. But the biggest struggle I had was my attitude, because I didn't get in trouble for drinking and using pills and marijuana and stuff during high school. I never got in trouble with the law at that time. That came later. But I struggled with schoolwork. I struggled with my grades. I was an A student up until junior high. So I had a lot going for me brain-wise. My brain was really good. I was very smart. But as I started making all these bad choices, intelligence is only going to carry you so far. You have to apply it. And I wasn't applying any of it.
So let me ask you this question. We haven't approached this topic yet in your youth, but and you touched on it in a minute and said we'd talk about it later. So let's talk about it now. So faith. Did you have any God at all from your grandparents or anything else? What was your belief about God as a youth?
So my grandparents, as were a lot of people from that era, were very faith oriented. People that had lived through the Depression, kind of, they knew where their help came from. So when I did go to church under the age of 9, when I did go to church, it was usually with them, and it was only occasionally. And at 9 years old, right before that summer trip where I took my first drink of alcohol, I accepted Jesus and I was baptized in their church. And I think that kind of goes to show you that just because you do something like that doesn't mean that you still won't make bad choices. So I look back at that moment as that was my moment, my first encounter with God, real encounter with God. In 1979, I was 10 years old, and my mom had hit rock bottom. We were living with her boyfriend. He was verbally abusive. And you had asked earlier about if she had been dating. She got remarried when I was 5 years old for about a year. And in that year, he spent half of that year in jail, and the other half he spent verbally abusing my mom and physically abusing me. And so they divorced, and we were back on our own. So when I was 10 years old, it was 1979, she had a breakdown. She was hooked on Valium, hooked on alcohol, hooked on marijuana. She was ready to take her own life. She was in the bathroom with the door locked, and she was ready to break the bathroom mirror to slit her wrist. And she cried out, and she just asked God to help her. She just, please help me. And at that moment, she felt this warm presence surround her, and almost like arms were around her, holding her. And she knew that was God. And she had never been a Christian. I mean, she grew up in my grandparents' church, her parents' church, but she was never committed to anything. And at that moment, she had that God moment. And it was a slow process after that. We moved out immediately, got our own place. We found a little tiny Southern Baptist church in the town we were at that had about maybe 40 or 50 people in it. And I grew up in that church. I did a lot of good things in that church. I did a lot of bad things in that church, but that's where she developed her relationship with Christ. And I just was there participating. She became our youth director, so I had my mom as a youth director. I think all the kids in the youth group loved her more than I did at the time. It was bittersweet with my mom. I love my mom. We have a great relationship today. But I was a handful. I was very rebellious. I fought with her all the time. A lot of yelling, a lot of screaming, and that was that whole resentment, anger, and fatherless issues coming up and manifesting itself. At that time, I was what the Bible refers to as a double-minded man, praising God on Wednesday nights and getting drunk and high on the weekends. And it was very conflicting. And I always felt that confliction, like the shame and the guilt after I do it, like I can't be doing this. And then I would just go out and do it again. And yeah, so that's how that relationship was with God growing up. And I was active in the youth group, but I was also active in my own partying lifestyle. And eventually one of them is going to win out over the other. And the partying lifestyle and sin and what I wanted to do in my will was more important.
So I want to just make a quick comment, and I've made this comment several times as people's given their testimony, but in recovery, we follow those principles. You know, there's 8 principles there, and principle 3 says consciously choose to commit all my life and will to Christ's care and control. And I love that because it makes a difference between giving my life and my will. And so just as a third party here, listening to your story, it sounds like that, would you say you were 9 or whenever you accepted Christ and you gave him your life, but boy, it sounded
that was
like
the easy part.
Yeah. But the will,
that's hard.
Yeah. And it sounds like the enemy had his hooks in you. And, you had some anger and you had some things that kind of pushed you into some rebellion. And again, once we start taking those steps towards the enemy and, he lies to us and we believe those lies. But so it sounds to me like you gave him your life, but you didn't quite give him your will. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Where did your path go after high school?
Once I got out of high school, I discovered cocaine. And once I discovered cocaine, it was like all bets were off. And this major addiction monster that had been lurking for so long kind of took over. A lot happened at 18. Well, I graduated at 17. At 18, my mom found out I was using drugs and alcohol. She knew I was using alcohol because she had discovered a couple of bottles, which I blamed on someone else, but she put 2 and 2 together. So at 18 years old, coming home drunk one night, and she had my bags packed and said that was it. She couldn't do it anymore. And so I lost a few jobs because of my addiction problems. And yeah, it was just kind of bouncing from job to job and staying with my grandparents. And I was just kind of spiraling. It was getting deeper and deeper. And the coke started off as maybe once a weekend, every other weekend. And that ended up really quickly becoming a very bad habit and a daily thing. And what started off as like $40 a weekend spending on cocaine ended up being a $200 a day habit. And the job I was working at the time, just had enough. And they were very aware of what was going on. It's hard to hide that kind of an addiction.
Yeah. So let me ask you, I mean, and drugs is not my area of struggle, but how did you afford that? I mean, I talked to a lot of people that end up becoming drug dealers to help, feed their addiction as well. I mean, they've got the stuff, they sell it for hire, and so they're able to do that. So did you sell the stuff as well, or did you just consume it? And I just want to make a clarification. You're not talking about crack cocaine. You're talking about regular cocaine. Isn't that more expensive than the crack cocaine? So, I mean, how did you afford that?
Well, you're exactly right. The job that I had making, I don't know, $5-6 an hour, $7 an hour would never have paid for a $200 a day habit. So I started learning how to sell, and so I would buy and sell just to pay for my own habit. It wasn't to get rich. It wasn't to make money. It wasn't to buy a house or a boat or anything like that. It was just to keep Travis in supply of more cocaine. And that went on for a couple of years. And then I was introduced to crystal meth, which became my drug of choice. It costs less. It kept me higher longer. It was easier to get. And my addictive personality won out again. And so that began about a 12-year run with crystal meth, which started off just every other day, wasn't staying up for long periods of time. I'd stay up maybe a day or so. But that addiction is a disease of progression. And so it did progress.
Did you ever get caught? I gotta interrupt. So, I mean, usually when I talk to people and they get into meth, I mean, that's so serious. They either become homeless and they're doing meth, or, again, getting into dealing and using and dealing and using, and they end up getting caught. Did you ever get caught?
The first time I ever had a run-in with the law, I was hanging out at a pool hall with a friend of mine, and he had about a $10 bag of cocaine, and he wanted to share it with me. So he gave me half of it. I had it in my pocket, and we're sitting in my car in the parking lot, and the sheriff's car pulled up right behind us. And so that was my first time getting arrested ever, first time getting in trouble, but it was a small amount. So they kind of just let that go. It was hard for them to process $5 worth of drugs. But I did end up spending a day in jail and got bailed out by my grandparents. But at that point is when my grandparents and my mom knew that I had a drug problem. That was the first time getting busted. I got busted again for meth for a lot more than a nickel bag about a year later, and ended up serving 6 months, 4 months out of a 6-month sentence at LA County Jail. And when I got out, I had learned new ways of not getting caught. Because jail will teach you things. They think it's going to teach you how to live life, and it just teaches you how to get away with stuff.
So where were you in the timeline there? How old are you whenever you're in the county jail for 4 months there?
20.
Okay.
Probably 20 years old, 21.
Okay. So a couple years out of high school, and so the
and everything had just spiraled so fast after getting out of high school.
So cocaine, meth, and then got caught once, but one night in jail, out, and then you get caught again, and now you're talking. You said 4 to 6 months there.
They gave me a 6-month sentence for possession, and I spent 4 out of 6 months. I got out 2 months early.
So let me ask you a question. You did so in. I mean, that's still 4 months that you are incarcerated. So that didn't shake you up. I mean, you apparently were 4 months sober, unless you can't get drugs in jail. At least I'm making that assumption. And so you got sober for 4 months, but that didn't deter you from, as soon as you getting out, you just now are going to go right back into it. But you think you can avoid getting caught?
Well, you can get drugs in jail.
Oh,
they're as available, if not more available, in jail. I did not use meth or cocaine or anything in jail. I did smoke weed a couple of times while I was in there, but for the most part, I kept it clean. I lost a lot of weight in jail because I was eating a regular diet and getting a lot of exercise. So I ended up losing like 60 pounds in jail. I was on meth and I was still pretty overweight, which is kind of hard to do. Um, but I wasn't, when I got busted the first time for meth, I wasn't a full-blown meth addict. I was using, but I wasn't near where I was going to be before I hit my bottom. I didn't know that. I thought I was, doing pretty bad. So my plan was not to get out and go get high, but that just kind of happened. The first day I got out, I had a friend show up and pick me up. He says, "Hey, I got something for you." And then it was off and running. And that's usually how it happens. Um, so I started back into that lifestyle again. And I came home to my grandparents' house and my grandma was crying. I asked her what was wrong, and she sat down and told me that my dad had had a heart attack and died. He was 47 years old. It was his third heart attack. Um, I was furious. I wasn't furious. I wasn't furious that he died, but I was furious that he died and I never really got to know him. And so we went up to the service in Northern California that weekend, and a lot changed for me that day. I became even more bitter and more angry. Um, I say it in my testimony that I hated him for leaving by dying, but I hated him more for never getting to know me. And he died never knowing that his son was a drug addict. He never knew I was an addict. Um, and so I came back from that and just kind of spiraled out of control, started hanging out at the dope dealer's house. My usage increased from every other day to daily to selling a lot of drugs and just kind of jumping into that lifestyle head first. Now, around that time, I was seeing a girl who had a couple of kids, and I was more of a babysitter with benefits. She had me watching her kids all the time while she went out and did her thing. And during that time in that relationship, I went with a friend of mine over to his girlfriend's house, and she had a roommate, and her name was Karen. And Karen and I hit it off right from the start. She was a few years older than I was, and she liked to party too. So I would go spend my time hanging out there and partying with her. And one thing led to another, and she had to leave her apartment, and I was staying at my grandparents' house, and they would go away for 3 or 4 months at a time on these long trips with their trailer, and they go back to Missouri and they go, do their thing. So I had her come over and stay with me. And the problem was I was still seeing this other girl at the time. And so that kind of came to a head and fell apart pretty bad. So anyway, long story short on that one, Karen and I were hanging out at my grandparents' house when they came home. And my grandparents came home from their trip, and my granddad's tools were missing again. See, I had a habit of stealing his tools and taking them to the pawn shop while they were gone. And so they had said they had had enough, and they told me to get out. And I had a car, so Karen and I had our car, and we drove around, kind of parking in different places and sleeping in the car. We stayed at friends' houses on couches. We found an empty apartment building in Bellflower that was just so happened to be right above our drug dealer's house. And the apartment manager, who was also an addict, agreed to let us stay there for a couple of days, which turned into months and months of squatting in this apartment. Electricity cord running out the door, getting electricity inside, nothing in the apartment, just clothes and carpet. And yeah, it was pretty rough, man. And we ended up, a friend of mine had a house or trailer, a double wide trailer in Bellflower. And he said we could come stay with him if we wanted to. So we did. And about that time, we found out that Karen was pregnant. And so she stopped using drugs. She was just as much as a drug user as I was. She stopped using drugs during her pregnancy. We ended up getting our own trailer across the driveway from our friend. But this whole trailer park was a hotbed for drug activity. There was a lot going on in this trailer park. Bellflower had a reputation for being a meth capital of Southern California at the time. So we got a roommate who had a girlfriend, and she was pregnant. So there was two couples, both with expectant babies coming. And at the same time, we were having 10 to 15 people in our house at any given time with drug traffic. because the guy I moved in happened to be one of the largest drug dealers in the area. And so we were selling drugs, using drugs. At one point, we were having members from one of the largest Latino street gangs in the nation paying us visits and bringing drugs. And so we had some very dangerous people involved in our lives. We were at that time, we were probably using 3 to 4 grams of speed a day, staying up for 5, 6, 7 days at a time. And when you stay up longer than a day, your mind starts playing little tricks on you. So you can imagine what happens after 4 or 5 days of not having any sleep. It was complete and utter chaos. There were gang members, guns, and chaos going on in our house. And our children, both the girls had their babies. So here we are raising children in this environment. And this went on for a little while. And I remember playing video games one morning and everybody was asleep because we'd been up for probably about a week. And I'm playing video games one morning and the front sliding glass door on the trailer had been boarded up because I had broke it earlier. So it had plywood on it. And I saw fingers coming through the door and they pulled the door down. It was about 20 cops in riot gear, dope sniffing dogs, and they came in and raided our place. We had been, someone had ratted us out, which it happens. And my roommate ran out the back door. I just stood there and froze. They dragged me outside, and I had about an 8 ball of speed in a jacket pocket hanging on the wall. And they asked me outside, "Is that jacket hanging on the wall yours?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "Yeah, that's mine." And so about that time, here comes my roommate up the driveway with 3 cops on him, dragging him up the driveway. So he was caught. They had us surrounded. So they came in and told Karen and our roommate's girlfriend, they said, "Look, we're taking care of these guys right now, but Children's Services is coming back and we're going to take your children." And so Karen called my mom and she says, "Travis got busted. He's off to jail. Our roommate's busted. He's off to jail. Children's Services coming back. They want to take Sarah, our daughter." She was almost 2 at the time. And she told my mom, "Come and get her." So my mom came right away and picked up Sarah and took her. And the state came back and actually got my roommate's kid. They said they would. They did it. And that was my 4th drug bust, or 4th time being arrested for methamphetamine. And it was my roommate's 4th time also. And he got 18 months in prison. And I ended up getting 6 months. So I think God was kind of looking out for me that day. I also know God was looking out for me that day because if they would have shown up about an hour earlier, that Mexican gang, 2 of the guys from there would have been there. They would have been armed and they would have had a lot of drugs on them and it would have been a mess. And it could have went really, really bad instead of the way that it went. I look back at that moment. That was a turning point. That was one of 2 turning points that got me on the right path. That was the turning point that let me know that we're now no longer getting away with anything. There's no more getting away with anything. And so when I got out of jail, I was in for the full 6 months. When I got out of jail, Karen had left me because she was an addict and she needed someone to keep her high. So she left me. I lost the trailer. I'd lost custody of my daughter because we voluntarily signed custody over to my mom to prevent the state from taking her. I lost the trailer. I'd lost my fiance. I'd lost custody of my daughter. I'd lost all my dignity and all my self-respect. And I was on an ankle monitor for about a month. And my grandparents, once again, let me stay with them for that month. And once that ankle monitor was removed, they said, "That's it. You got to go." And I was out on the streets for a couple of weeks. 3 or 4 of those nights, I was sleeping on a park bench with a piece of plastic to keep the dew off, and staying at a couple of friends' houses. And on October 15th, 1998, I get emotional when I talk about it. That's my clean date. On October 15th, 1998, I made a call to my mom and I said, "I'm done. I need help. Can you come pick me up?" And she said no. And that was the hardest no That was the hardest no she could ever say, because she knew if she would have picked me up and looked me in the eyes, I would have conned her out of some money and I'd have been off and running again. But what she did do is she gave me a phone number. And she says, if you want help, you call this number. And she hung up on me. And it was the associate pastor at her church. And I called the number and I said, this is Travis. He says, I've been waiting for your call. He says, a long time. And I said, I need help. Can you get me help? He says, I've got a place for you to go if you're ready to go. I said, I'm ready. So he came and picked me up. And before we went over to the place he was taking me, I said, I know where Karen's at. Can I go tell her where I'm going and then I'm going to, what I'm going to do? He says, yes. We drove over to where Karen was at. And I said, look, I'm going to go get our daughter back. And here's the phone number to the recovery home I'm going to. And I wished her the best and I walked away. And I never thought I'd see Karen again. And so he took me to a place called Catholic Rainbow Outreach in Whittier, California. It is a Christian men's home. It is not a recovery home. Pastor Ben Reed is the founder of the home, and his passion was the prisons. And so he created a home with about 18 beds for guys to land when they were paroling from prison and to help get them back on their feet through a discipleship program. So it was a 1-year discipleship program with a lot of pages of rules. There were pages and pages of them, and I must have been really ready because the rules sounded perfectly acceptable to me. I did 90 meetings in 90 days, all secular recovery meetings, AA and NA. And there were Bible studies every day. Every single day we had a Bible study. So it was an immersion. My plan was to get clean and sober, get our daughter back, and then get high again. I didn't say it was a good plan. That was my plan.
So let me stop you. Let me stop you and ask you this. So during that time, I mean, you said you had a plan to get sober and get your daughter back. So, I mean, even AA, I mean, they talk about the higher power. I mean, where is God in all of this inside of you? I mean, where did you say, hey, man, maybe I need to pursue this God thing? And, man, look where this other path led me. I mean, were you rationalizing anything in your mind, or was it, no, I just need to get back. I need to go back to my, to my addiction. And, I mean, what was your rationale?
I knew it was a Christian men's home, and they were heavily into Bible studies and relationship with Christ. And so I was willing at the time to do and say whatever they needed me to say to get through the program, not knowing that God was going to okey doke me and get me again. My plan faded away within about 2 weeks. I think they let me detox for about 3 days in a room, which they don't let people detox there, but they let me detox in this room for 3 days, fed me and kept me in this room for 3 days to get whatever drugs are in my system. Especially with meth, it gets out of your system physically pretty quickly. Mentally takes a lot longer. And I think after the detox and after doing the Bible studies, I started realizing that my plan wasn't going to work, and that God was not just knocking on the door of my heart, he was banging on the door of my heart. And so I fully rededicated my life to Jesus right there in the home. Had many emotional moments. I had lots of tears in that home, lots of tears. And I fell back in love with Jesus Christ again. And I had forgotten, I had been away from him for so long that I'd forgotten how good it felt to be in his presence again. And this time it was real. I mean, it was real before, but there was moments where Travis's self-will would take over, and this felt very real. So yeah, really quickly, probably within a couple of weeks, man, I fully surrendered to Jesus Christ, fully surrendered to what he wanted me to do. I didn't know where my life was going, what direction it was going. I knew I was desperate I got clean to get my daughter back. I'm 100%. It was not for me. I could care less if I was clean or not. I could not live knowing that I didn't have my daughter in my life. And my mom was going to do whatever she could to keep her away from me because of what I was doing. I don't blame her at all. So it was a pretty quick turnaround, man. And I a pretty quick rededication of my life. And I just kind of fell into this program head first, and I devoted everything into what I was doing, and cracked open that Bible that I had had since I was a kid. I was able to bring my Bible with me, and surprisingly, I had that Bible with me out on the street. But it was just in a bag. I had two bags. That was what I had left in the world, were two plastic grocery sacks, all my worldly possessions, and one of them was that Bible. And so I started doing the 90 meetings in 90 days, and I was getting uh, all the lingo and all the recovery talk and all that stuff, and the Bible studies were amazing. And um, so 6 months in, I had some computer skills, so they put me to work up in the office of the home, answering phone calls and typing letters, because I was typing letters to inmates and responding to letters that were sent to the home. I would respond back. Um, and 6 months in, and the phone rings, and it's Karen, and she's crying, and she's like, "I'm done." And so I just said, "Thank you, Jesus." And we went and picked her up and put her in a recovery home that day. And that was May 29th, 1999. And that's where she met Christ for her first time in her life. And so Karen did 6 months at her program. It was just a 6 month program, and she went to live with her sister. And by that time, we had rekindled our relationship. So she was waiting for me to finish my program. Um, I saw my daughter all the time. Uh, I stayed 19 months in a 1 year program. I was in a safe place, Eric. I didn't want to leave because where I was at, life was good. I wasn't in trouble. The pressures of the world weren't beating down my door. But by the time I hit 12 months, I graduated and moved across the street to the sober living home, and had to go out and get a job. And 8 places told me no. And then the ninth one said, "We're going to give you a shot. Don't mess it up." And finally saved up enough money to buy a very, as my wife puts it in our testimony, a very, 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 very used car. It was a bucket. I think I paid $800 for it. And it barely ran, but it ran. And I was actually able to pick her up on Sundays and take her to church. We were dating. We never dated before. We were together for all those years since 95. And so got a place. So I got out of there in 2000, got a place, and Karen and I set a wedding date. And on March 10th, 2001, we were married. Sarah was 5 years old. She was the prettiest flower girl we had ever seen. Um, and shortly after that, we had full custody again. Both had jobs. So 2 years earlier, we were both homeless, penniless. Nobody in our family trusted us to walk into their house, or they would call the cops because we were stealing from everybody we could. That's what drug addicts do, or at least the drug addicts I hung out with. Um, and 2 years later, here we are. We both have jobs. We have a car. We have our daughter back. We're trusted by our family members again. And we've got God at the center of our lives. We were attending that church that my mom and daughter attended. And we were committed members, man. We were going Sundays, Wednesday nights, men's Bible fellowship, all that stuff. And life was good, man. And about 10 years went by, and I could feel God knocking at my heart saying, "Look, you've got all this stuff that I've given you back. I've helped restore your entire life. You've got recovery, you got all this stuff, and you're doing nothing with it." And my mom at that time was attending another church, Cottonwood Church in Los Alamitos. And we went and visited her church one day, and we saw an advertisement on the screen for Celebrate Recovery. And we went on a Friday night, and they had just started up. They'd only been going for about 2 months. And they had just started up. And that night right there, God spoke to my heart. He says, "This is where I want you to be." I came in with a lot of ego, and I knew that if I was going to be a leader, that the requirement was that I had to go through a step study. And so I got into a step study, and I walked into that step study with this big bag of pride and this big bag of ego. And I was going to show the two guys running the group what real recovery looks like. And God humbled me in the first 2 weeks. And I had this sudden realization that I had absolutely no recovery.
Mm.
I had 10 years sobriety. I hadn't recovered from anything. Karen and I would get into an argument and it ended up in a yelling match. Someone would cut me off on the freeway and I'm flipping them off out the window, going to church, going to men's Bible group and flipping off people out the window. And I knew that something wasn't fixed yet. I was still broken. And so I put everything and poured it all out into that first step study. And I thought I had a good relationship with Jesus until I went through that step study. And once I got through that step study, I realized I'd been missing so much with my relationship with Christ. It took my relationship with him to a completely new level. And Karen got into a step study, and we were there literally every Friday night up until a couple of years ago when we moved.
So what was the difference? What's the difference between being sober and then having recovery?
The difference to me between sobriety and recovery is just abstinence from using a substance or stop doing a bad behavior. You're not doing what you were doing before. I was sober for almost 4 months in jail. I didn't have recovery.
Yeah.
You know, I was abstinent from using a substance, so I was sober. Recovery is actually investing yourself into digging down into why you did the things that you did, what caused you, in my case, being a drug addict, what caused me to self-medicate. Recovery helped me get, especially the step study through Celebrate Recovery, helped me get under the surface in a safe, comfortable environment and dig those things up and reveal that it was anger, bitterness, resentment, fatherlessness, abandonment, all those things that caused me to self-medicate.
Yeah. So I love what you're saying, and it, to summarize that in a short sentence, sobriety is external and recovery is internal.
Yeah,
You can be sober, like you said, you can go to jail and you can't drink, but that doesn't mean that you're not a drunk anymore. And
sobriety is a change on the outside and recovery is a change on the inside.
Right. Absolutely. So if you've got one message to that person whose heart is soft and they're listening, what is that one message that you want to give to the listeners today?
That you may feel alone. You may feel that nobody knows the stuff that you've been through. You've heard the stuff that I've been through, but nobody knows your stuff. And the reality is God knows. God knows you. He knows your name. He's chasing after you. And he will walk with you and never leave you, never forsake you. He'll walk you with this whole process and get into community with other people that are just like you, because there's tons of us out there that are going through the same thing that you're going through. And when you sit in those circles, you'll realize that your world is not as big as you think it is. It's a lot smaller, and that there's other people that know exactly how you feel, and you don't have to do this alone.
Travis, thanks so much for sharing your life change story with us. Hey, if you are listening today and you've been trying to make permanent change in your life, maybe that change is an addiction, or maybe it's outbursts of anger, or possibly you struggle with people pleasing or codependency. Whatever your struggle is, change is possible as you surrender to Jesus Christ. He will change your life and give you peace, just like he did for Travis. However, if nothing changes, nothing changes. See you next time.
Share a couple's testimony, and we'll have people come up to us and say, I'm looking at you and I can't imagine any of those things that you said you guys did. Gang members and guns and drugs and violence and all this stuff. Like, yeah, it's all true. It's all there. It's all court record. it's real. And it's amazing that if I can stand in front of a room of 100 people and one person says that made it real for me, then it was worth it. It was worth it.
Hey, if you are still listening and you like this podcast, I want to encourage you to listen to previous episodes because they will help to inspire change in your life. Also, if you like what you hear, please leave a positive review because it helps to bring this podcast to others. But no matter what, may God bless you and may God bring positive change to your life.